Now that we have our contour line drawing transferred to our drawing paper, let's talk about applying value. I'm going to move this off to the side right now. We're going to take a look at a couple of different pencils. For our project, we're going to work with three types of pencils. We're going to work with a 6H pencil. Now remember, H stands for hard graphite. And the higher the number of the H pencil, the harder the graphite, which means it's going to leave a lighter mark. We're going to work with an HB pencil, and this one we're pretty familiar with. It's one we use all the time, even with just normal sketching. And that is normally our number 2 pencil here at school. We're going to get out a drawing quality HB pencil. And then we're going to finish up with a darker value pencil, and in this case we're going to work with a 4B. Now, we've worked with HB quite often, and 4B is going to be the very last thing we use on our composition, so I'm going to put it off to the side. We're going to start with 6H, and 6H is going to give us very light values. Now, since we haven't worked with 6H pencil before, I would strongly suggest that you take your sketchbook and you can go to the part of the sketchbook in which we had previously practiced some value scales. In this case, our blended gradual value changes. And I just took a couple of the extra lines I had drawn in here. And if you don't have those in there, you can easily add them in. Remember, we just used a ruler. We just traced the thickness of our ruler onto our paper. So you can see here from this pencil line to the one down below there is just the width of my ruler. And then I just make little marks on the left and right side, guesstimating about where that halfway point is, and draw another line. So I have a narrow area in which to practice. I'm labeling it as 6H, and you can see here I also have one labeled for 4B. Since we haven't worked with 4B, we'll also want to do this with that pencil when it comes time to. Now, 6H, we are going to be using the circular shading technique whenever we shade. But for now, all that I want is to see what the range is for 6H. So I'm going to just apply some light pressure. And as I move across, I'm going to increase the pressure on that pencil. And I'm going to keep on doing that as I come across. And I'm going to try to go as dark as I can, even if it means damaging the paper somewhat. So I can feel ridges on my paper. I could even see them start to form while I was doing that. And you can see with heavy pressure to the point that I'm denting the fibers of my paper, that is the darkest a 6H is going to create. And up above there, you can see when we worked with our HB pencil, how dark that pressure was without damaging the paper, without going to the point that we're pressing so hard we're stretching the fibers. So 6H is going to give us light values. Now, the benefit of working with different grades of pencils is that we don't have to go to this darkest value. We have other pencils within our range that can go darker and lighter. So it's kind of like an overlapping system. When we were practicing the HB, I kept on encouraging you especially to work with your lighter values. They are the most difficult to create when working with pencils. We'll see how this goes. My camera froze for a minute, and I will see how I'm going to splice this together. So as I was mentioning, whenever we work with any pencil, we don't need to go to the darkest possible value that that pencil can create. Working with a range of pencils, the benefit is that we can have overlap. When we were working with HB, I encouraged you to try to work with your lighter values. It's more difficult to create light values working with graphite because that lighter pressure sometimes makes it feel as if we don't have control of the pencil. But you can see here, HB is capable of getting that value of gray that is the hardest, heaviest pressure with my 6H. So when working with 6H, we want to keep closer to the medium to light range on our composition. That's going to prevent an occurrence of too much graphite accumulated on our paper. What I mean by that is there does reach a point when you are working with pencil that, especially with heavier pressure, that you have filled up the fibers of the paper or even possibly flattened them down enough that they're not going to want to grip and hold on to graphite pencil anymore. So if I keep to some medium to light values with each of the pencils I use, and then as I want to go darker, go to a pencil that allows me to get darker values because it's a softer graphite, I will then be able to layer graphite on top of graphite more and more throughout my drawing. Once you have practiced a range, we're ready to start into applying graphite to our composition. So we're going to need three things. We are, of course, going to need our composition. We have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, our contour line drawing transferred onto our onto our drawing paper. And we're going to need, of course, our still life taped down on the card. And I'm going to want to move this still life back into position as I had originally drawn it. We're also going to need our 6H pencil. Now, since I am working with light gray values, that is what I am looking for on my composition, on my still life, to place onto my contour line drawing. What I am looking for, if I can zoom in here, is, and this is one advantage of having this taped onto white paper, is I am looking for the slight shading and shadows that even a clear packaging will have or create, because it has a slight thickness to it. Even if it's transparent, it will still shadow areas. So as you can see there up against my white drawing paper and my white index card in this clear packaging, do you see these light grays? They first were noticeable when I was drawing my contour. It's how I was able to tell the edges of this packaging. These are a lot of the values I'm going to be working with. I'm going to try to, as best as I can, look for any shapes in light gray and shade those in. I'm also going to, when necessary, shade around highlights, leave those white. Now, from a top-down view, you're seeing a bright white highlight here, but when I am looking at it from my viewpoint, that bright white highlight isn't there. I see a bright white highlight over here. I see one on the edge here. So keep in mind that if this still life my arrangement of items is visible on screen while I start applying values here, that is not necessarily the same viewpoint. So I'm going to see light hitting my objects differently than the camera up above me is going to see. When it comes to packaging in which I have items that are really filling it and may make it a little bit more difficult to see those value changes, this is when I'm going to go back to what we had discussed when we did our simple shapes on that one handout. If you remember our value practice sheet that had the 5 shapes at the top and the stars in the pear, and we had talked about light sources and highlights and how near highlighted areas our values start to go darker as we've moved further away from the light source. I'm going to keep that in mind for packaging that may be a little bit more difficult to see my value changes. So in the case of my Smarties, I can see a bright highlight. So I know somewhere near it, I'm going to have lighter values. And as my candy works closer to the table, my values will darken. That is because I know my light source is above me in the ceiling. So most of my light values are going to occur up top of the objects, and most of my darker values and shadows are going to occur down near the table. When it comes to paper packaging that's not see-through, again, I can see the value changes a little bit more clearly than I could on a cellophane wrapped object. But I'm also going to keep in mind, if I see any brighter spots or highlights, that near it will be lighter gray values. So as I start this and I rearrange my still life into the position that I had it when I first drew it, I'm going to start with just some light gray values. What I want to be careful of is pencil smearing also. So as I do work, I will use an extra sheet of paper to protect my drawing. So if I'm going to start working on an item that's back here in the back, so I'm going to put a little bit of the light gray values I'm seeing on my clear cellophane of that butterscotch candy. Instead of resting my hand on my drawing as I do that, since I'm going to be moving my pencil in that circular motion and I know my hand's going to rub up against my paper, I'm going to put another piece of paper under that hand to protect the rest of my drawing. And this is a good practice to have when you work with any type of drawing. If you can place a piece of paper underneath the hand working the tool, or in this case the pencil, then it saves a lot of smearing of your project. So I'm going to closely observe. So this is just another step of observational drawing. And I'm going to look for some light to medium light gray values. And again, I'm keeping in mind my pencil range for 6H. And if it helps, have that paper that you tested it out on in front of you so that you can understand the amount of pressure you want to put and the darkest gray value you want to apply with the 6H. So looking here at my composition, I see a lighter gray in here, and again, we're using the circular shading technique. I want this to be as nice and neat as I could possibly make it, and that's what that technique allows me to do. It reduces the amount of lines that could distract the viewer of my project from all the nice, beautiful work I've done so far. And it will also allow me to keep my edges nice and straight. So I'm going to apply some light gray values, working into some medium tone values. So on that one piece of candy, I don't have everything filled in. I don't have every single value change I'm going to see. I'm just trying to pick out my light to medium light values that my 6H can create. So that means like things like my butterscotch candy, that the yellow is definitely darker than the clear packaging. Those are values I'll put in with another pencil later on. There's some shadowing that's occurring in this part of the wrapper of the fruit chew that's behind the butterscotch candy, but it's a little bit darker of a value than what I would want this pencil to create. But I can see along the top edge of that a lighter gray that I'm going to include. And I'm going to include some of the lighter grays I'm noticing as lighter blues on this fruit chew. So again, I'm not going for my full vacuum to try to complete the project in this application of the 6H pencil, what I am looking for is to just start establishing some of my lighter values that I can observe. And when I'm having troubles deciding what I'm actually seeing for light grays, I'm remembering the rules about light source. So I know most of the time a lot of my lighter values are going to be facing up towards the ceiling where the light source is coming from. And they're going to be near highlights, and in sudden value change occurrences, like where packaging wrinkles and stuff, my higher parts of those wrinkles would also be a good educated guess for applying some lighter gray values. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm following the same rules also of observational drawing. That's why sometimes my pencil will pause for a little bit or stay in one area, because I am constantly looking from here to my still life, back to here, back to my still life. Remember, observational drawing is drawing what we see and doing the best we can at drawing what we see, and not just going with what we think we know is happening. Okay, so this is not completed. This is just putting some light grays to medium light grays using my 6H pencil range to start establishing some form and some texture. My next step is I'm going to then go into HB pencil, and that'll be in the next video. Understand that as I work with my pencils, I am going to layer the HB with this. I'm not going to fill in the blanks with HB, though I will fill in more white spaces that are left with HB, but I can layer HB over top of what 6H I have applied. And it's going to be dependent on how I'm perceiving the values as I go darker. Right now, these grays, though they're not very dark, compared to just our plain white paper, have definitely added some darker value to it. As I go into darker pencils though, these values will get lighter in appearance. So I will constantly be navigating where my lights and my darks are as I layer pencil on top of each other. So I'm not completely done with 6H. I may have to come back to it to work with some values later on. And that's okay. That is the whole process with drawing. We start an area, we start with some light values, we slowly start to darken, and then sometimes we have to adjust one way or the other as we complete our drawing. So in our next video, we're going to talk about adding HB pencil to our composition.